There's probably a whole another show on the feedlot and everything that happened out there.
Yeah,
'Cause
there's
there's
probably a
Oh, there
lot.
would be.
plenty of action out there with all the
Hmm.
cold and everything. But
Yeah. Well,
anyway.
as long as you're willing to run your mouth, I'm probably willing to hit record.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is the site of the old feedlot. And although this may not seem very interesting to many of you, there's a lot of time spent out here looking after cattle. Electric fence running all the way around. Used to have slats up everywhere too. It's since turned into firewood, I believe. And there, back away over there in the corner, was where the other feedlot used to be. So we used to keep the cattle spread out. All the feeders here. All those would-be feeders down there, and the cows and the calves over here was the usual assignment. This was the area that we used to separate the cattle. As you can see, the squeeze gate. And there used to be fences running across over to this pole, and we used to be able to separate the cattle. So Dad decided to get Key and Ina, and then they just jumped over us. And in here, we had many a bull. It became less a bull or two. And yeah, that's a pretty good sum up of the yard from this particular angle.
How's everybody?
Good.
Real good. Yeah.
Good. So RW might be the only one of us three getting rain.
Definitely. Getting rain every day. In the last month, we've only had 3 days where it did not precipitate at least 1/10.
Hmm.
And so the lawns are green and everything is, the fire hazard is virtually nil. There's a couple of fires in California and I think 2 in Arizona, and that's it.
That's
Hmm.
great.
So yeah, it's a breath of fresh air.
We haven't
guess so.
even had 3 days of rain.
We had 3 drops this morning.
We didn't even have that. And the air quality is getting bad again today. What's it like there, Dad?
It was pretty smoky earlier, but it's
Mm.
cleared up some this evening.
I always think Grandma and Grandpa's clock doesn't chime on here. You can't hear it, hey?
A little bit,
Can you?
a little bit. Yeah,
I like
not
it.
too
I
bad.
like the sound of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking that, well, every time we do this, I learn a lot. I think one of the things I know the least about probably is the feedlot. I probably don't have
Okay.
any idea what was going on out there.
What year did you
Well,
get out of cattle, Dad?
I believe it was 83,
Okay.
or the spring of 84, maybe. I'm not sure, but I got out of the cows first, and then I fed a few cattle the winter after that because I had silage to use up and some of that kind of stuff. But did you want me to give you just a little bit of early history on that? On the
Sure.
feedlot?
I have some questions, but they can wait for when the timing is right, for sure.
Okay. Well, I'll try not to be too lengthy on it, but when when I pretty much knew that I was going to be farming, um, your grandpa and myself started to kind of prepare for it a little bit. And I think the year was probably 1958 or thereabouts when the rail line branches that went on beyond Snowflake out to Follison in the west and Windigates in the east, they closed those out and lifted the lines. And so because of that, there were a bunch of railway ties that became available for local farmers to buy. So we took advantage of that and we bought a bunch of them and piled them. And so then that was ready to work with when I wanted to build a feedlot. Now, if you remember looking at pictures of the farmyard, the early pictures that didn't have very much going on there, you probably would have noticed that there was not much on the west side of the barn over in that direction. There were trees and there was kind of a grassy area where we did keep cattle, but there wasn't any wooden fencing or anything like that. So then when I graduated from university and decided to start farming, first thing I did was I wanted to build a feedlot because that was supposed to be a money maker for me. And of course that didn't always work out, but anyway. So the first fall, which would have been before I was married, I got Bud Milger to take me way down east of Letellier, east of Emerson, into the Sandylands Forest Reserve. And we loaded up a great big truckload of slabs, which are the thin layers that are trimmed off the outside of trees to make them into lumber. And they were there for the pick, you know, like you didn't have to pay for the, well, you might have paid a little bit, maybe $5 a cord or something like that. But anyway, we loaded up his truck about 8 feet high and 16 feet long, and it was only a 12-foot box. So it took a whole long day. We left early in the morning, drove down there, had to find all these places and load the stuff all at home. And then the work began. We started digging holes for the ties, which would be the fence posts, and then nailing some of the heavier slabs on as railings, and then nailing slabs vertically to them to make the fences that were the feedlot. And so you would remember the feedlot that was there just west of the hen house. Had an automatic water at the one side and so on. Anyway, that was the beginning of the feedlot. That would have been about 1959. No, I'm sorry about that. That's not right. 1962. 1962. Then gradually, it just evolved as time went on. Started out with one of the little old hen houses beside the feedlot to grind grain into, and then eventually we ended up having the grain roller in the barn and did things like that. But anyway, that's the way it started.
Well, I think that for a lot of people who don't have the experience, yeah, there's a business model in place when you start talking about a cattle operation and a grain operation, because they residually help each other in the sense that for example, the straw that is a byproduct of growing grain and the harvesting process becomes bedding for the cattle.
Right.
Some of the grain, especially grain that could not be used for seed, becomes a residual benefit for the cattle operation in the form of feed. And the difference between the grain side and the cow side effectively often is referred to as cash crop, where your cattle have a tendency to be considered more of a cash crop than your grain does. Is that fair to say, or can you elaborate on that a little bit?
I guess I haven't heard it referred to exactly that way, but it could be true. Yeah. One of the things that was a problem through all those years was farmers could grow more grain than they were entitled to sell through the wheat board system. And so one way they got around that was by having cattle and feeding grain to cattle. And because with the wheat board, there was what they called a quota system, and you were only able to deliver so many bushels per acre to the elevator throughout the growing or the selling season. And it wasn't, sometimes it was enough to get rid of your whole crop, but you might have to hold the crop for more than a year to sell it. So by putting it through cattle, it did enable you to get it to market a different way.
That makes sense. What are you thinking, Eleanor? You got a question?
Well, yeah, I sure do. So you had said that the barn was sort of the hub of, like we talked about the barn in depth. We even had Auntie Mary's take of the barn before the barn that we know as the barn. So we went back pretty far, but the barn was the hub of everything that happened that had to do with
Yeah,
cattle.
there was a lot that went on in that barn besides milking cows. There was it was the place where anything to do with cattle ended up. That was kind of the center.
Yep.
Cattle.
So
So when I asked, what was it like when you start your day and the first thing you do is open the door and get smacked in the face by the smell of nature and you back out I think I'm calling it the right thing, the 44, and then the cattle drop 20 pounds because they don't wait till they go outside. They don't wait till they go into the feedlot. So one of the things on my mind is, okay, so cattle is like a huge tie you down. You got to do chores morning and night, right?
Right.
It's not quite like a dairy farm, but a little, because you're still there and you have to do that. So all the stories, Dad, about coming home from playing for a dance, but you're not done. I went off to bed bitching about getting up in the morning for church, and you're just putting your overalls on, and I don't know anything about that. So what was what was the most head of cattle you had? Like, how big a operation was this, and how were you making money? Was it just selling the beef for meat? Obviously it fed us, but what was the overall business plan? Because I don't quite get the time put in and what you got out of it ratio exactly.
Okay. Well, okay, to start with, I kept the cow herd that your grandpa had. I kept that and expanded on it so that I was able to raise some of my own young cattle up and feed them through to the time they were ready to sell. But I didn't have room to have a large beef cow herd. So I think the most I had was somewhere around 40 or 45 cows. And so in addition to that, then, in the fall of each year, I would buy what they call feeder cattle, which were cattle at various partly grown ages. Like sometimes they would be calves in the fall that were about 500 pounds or so. And sometimes I would buy larger cattle. But the idea was that the winter time was when you could have time to look after more cattle. And usually you would feed them through the ones you bought, you would feed through the winter to fatten them up, along with the younger cattle you had raised yourself. And you would hope then by sometime end of March, end of April, hopefully not too much later than that, you would be selling them as finished cattle that would go to market and be butchered for beef. And nothing ever works according to plan, of course. So the market keeps fluctuating up and down. So when you go to buy your cattle in the fall, prices are high. And when you go to sell them in the spring, they might not be so high. So you might, instead of selling them in March, you might say, okay, I'm going to feed them a bit longer, let them get a little bit bigger, and hopefully the price will go up some while I'm doing this. Sometimes it worked in your favor, sometimes it didn't. Sometimes it went down, and you would have been better to sell them sooner. But that's the nature of farming or any other business that you don't have control of the market.
that's commodities for you, right?
That's commodities, yes, that's it. Mm-hmm.
So was it worth it? All the commitment of time. Did you feel it was like a good source of income, or did you wonder why you're doing cattle?
Well, there were times you wondered why, but again, because we couldn't sell everything we grew on the land by doing it any other way, it made sense to keep the cow. And you do a little bit of, I guess you'd say, creative mathematics when you're calculating the value of your crops. Because if you could sell them all at a good price by hauling it down to the elevator, it would make sense to do that and forget about the cattle. But because the cattle enabled you to market that grain, sometimes you charged it over from the grain operation to the cattle operation at a lower price because that's what you would have had to do if you were going to sell it on the open market. And when you did that, that made the cattle operation look a little better because the grain price going into the cattle was a bit lower than what you might buy it for on the market. So again, it's a whole balancing operation.
Was it a taxable help at tax
Um,
time?
There can be some benefits, yes.
Okay.
Like, okay, anything that you spend building feedlots or anything like that is an expense that you can charge off against the cattle. Some of it is a capital expense, which you charge over time as depreciation. Some of it is a cash expense, which comes right off the value of what you sell. So there's a whole mixture of things, but generally speaking, it was a benefit from a tax standpoint to have the cattle. It tended to even the income out. One of the things, the challenges that any business person has is to try to make your income one year somewhat equal to what you have other years, so it doesn't fluctuate up and down too much. Because when it's higher, you pay a much higher rate of income tax. When it's lower, you pay less tax. So if you can even it out, that's good. And the tax system did have some provisions where you could do some things to make that work. One of the things that a lot of people did was if they could see that they were going to be highly taxable in a given year, in December of that year, they'd go out and buy a bunch of cattle. And that could be charged off as an expense for that year and reduce the taxable income. But if you did that year after year, over time, you might end up, it might come back to bite you in the end. I think that happened to Alvin Finley a number of times. He just kept getting more and more cattle.
I remember going down to the freezer and it was like our own supermarket of meat.
Yes, we always made sure we had good beef. Yeah.
And that freezer, everything was wrapped in a brown wrapper and labeled. So you had farmed that out. It would go to the butcher and they would package it up for you.
Yeah, we took the whole animal to the butcher to get it packaged. Some people did cut their own meat up and package it, but we found that we weren't really set up for it. It just made sense to take it and get it done properly. We butchered it ourselves, but then took the carcass out, or I guess you'd call it the carcass out, and got them to dress it up for us. To have good beef, you don't just cut it up and package it right away. You let it hang for a given number of days. It could be anywhere from 9 to 18 days to age it. What makes the meat more tender and more flavorful.
Well, and you wasted nothing. I didn't like every package that was in there.
Did you enjoy liver?
Well, I probably didn't mind liver as much as I hate to admit that now, and I probably haven't eaten liver since then, but the tongue, really?
Oh, well, that tongue was a real delicacy.
Oh, and they call it shank. Gross.
No, shank is something else.
It's
Is
something
it?
else. Yeah.
Oh, I thought that was another name for the tongue. What's a shank? Or do I even want to know?
Just above the ankles.
Oh.
If you go to a processing plant, there's a gate coming in the front, and that's where all the animals go in, and there's a door in the back where all the packages go up. But you'll notice that there isn't any waste. There's no roll off back there or anything else. Every part of that animal is processed in one capacity or another.
Yeah.
Every single part. Nothing's coming out the back.
And there's a bit of a joke about hogs. They say they use everything but the squeal.
Yeah. Well, and if you want proof of that, go to Pennsylvania, because they serve up a dish there, a potted meat called scrapple,
Okay.
and that's probably the last bucket before you hit the back door, and they
Yeah.
just form it into shapes. It's 2 levels below spam or click, and and they fry it up. You don't want to do, you don't want to eat it any other way. It's got to be fried up. You don't need to throw anything in the pan when you throw it in there either. It's already comes prepackaged with all the fat you would ever need to fry it up. And so when we go back there, we all, that's, for me, it's about once every 2 years, and that's about all you can take, because one serving of that and you're pretty much good. Your heart's pounding and you're pretty much ready to go for a walk and try to help yourself get through that. But it's a good snack, and that's just that part of the story. So.
As part of my university training, we spent a number of days going through stockyards and packing plants and seeing the whole operation. And it's an eye opener.
Mhm.
There's things. It would be more of an eye opener if we hadn't butchered any of our own cattle on the farm. But
I had a miniature experience about witnessing stuff that we didn't do on our farm. Like I would have never witnessed, yes. So I was at Sharon's, I don't know, I don't think it was planned that it was during this day, but the Gertzen brothers would get together and have a pig butchering day. And then they would divvy it up and everybody would take their part. So I've never seen anything like that before, and I didn't do good with that. I didn't like it. I got teased a little bit about, hey, Eleanor, are you going to hold open the pig? Because they were talking about all the guts falling out, and they knew I didn't like that. So I said, no, I won't be doing that. But they had ham for lunch, and I didn't get that. I thought maybe they'd have that later, like a week later, but I didn't think on the same day. But they were also happy because they were getting all their parts, and this was a big day and it was a productive day.
Nothing like having fresh beef or fresh meat. Yeah.
Fresh meat, yeah, any form.
They didn't have a problem with having it for lunch, but I didn't have any, and I didn't get that. But
Well,
that's okay.
When you tour a packing plant, they have their own restaurant there, and so we would go tour the killing floor, and then we'd go and eat lunch. Some people didn't make it through lunch very well.
Oh. Well, and you guys talked about processing. You thought it was 6 cattle from getting in the sweet corn that day. So my mind goes a little bit, yeah, I wouldn't have needed the visuals of that for sure. But you also talked about something else I wouldn't like was taking the horns off of cattle, which I don't know anything about. Then you said there was another end, which I don't know anything about. But I know there was a day where you put the tags in their ears and label, like, number the cattle.
Yep.
So what other processes happened out there? Because it would have been a lot of things.
Well, I'm going to jump in here just for a second, if it's okay. One of the things that most people don't get to experience is a feedlot and everything that goes along with feedlot or with cattle operation. And for me, it was an education because I grew up in it. And so I learned all about anatomy. I learned all about sex. I learned about artificial insemination, emasculation, a whole host of activities that are natural to the process of owning and raising cattle to end up in a farm to market kind of an environment. And I'm really thankful that I got a chance to grow up in that and to learn all of those facets of animal husbandry and processing and everything else that goes along with it. I learned a real respect for not just cattle, but animals as a whole, the entire process from birth to death and everything in between. And I don't know that I would have learned that any other way. I don't think that's something that you can really learn in school. You pretty much have to learn that hands-on. And you talk about Dad coming home from playing in the band, and he would get home, it'd be calving time, and out the door, you got to go and check and see because if you got a calf born in the mud, you got to get it out of there. And you talk about the barn being a part of the whole process with the feedlot, and it very much was. It was the safe house, if you will, for the cattle. The cows that were having trouble giving birth, we'd often have to pull the calves. The cows that already had a calf, we need to get them inside where they could mother up. And so, yeah, the barn was a big part of the whole feedlot operation, and the feedlot was a part of everything that was going on in the barn. So it was reciprocal.
How did you decide which cattle would be in the barn and which cattle would have to spend the night out there in the feedlot?
Well, generally speaking, the cattle that were purchased as to be fattened in the feedlot, they all stayed outside. The cows, there was always some older cows that were maybe less able to stand the cold weather, and some younger cattle, the same thing. So those are the ones that would be in the barn, up to the capacity of the barn. And sometimes you decide, okay, we haven't got room for any more, so these ones are the strongest ones, they'll be outside. If you could arrange to have cows inside when they were calving, that was a good thing. But you didn't always know when they were going to calve. So you just had to be watchful. And like there are certain things that you can see that let you know a cow is about to calf within, say, maybe the next 10 or 12 hours. But you don't know 2 or 3 days ahead for sure. You might be watching a cow for 2 weeks and she still won't give birth because she has, all the symptoms. But anyway, it's just part of the thing is you got to be on call and be ready.
That plays into the prioritization of everything too, because you literally, and you talk about, having to spend how much time was spent working with cattle. And it's a lot, because you do have to watch them all the time. Anything starts going wrong, you got to be on top of it, because you really can't afford to lose a cow. Because a cow, if a cow is lost, that's a significant investment that has just passed away. And if you aren't able to process the animal, it's a complete loss. So again, there's a business element there, and prioritization. And I remember, for example, Christmas, we would go out, and first thing in the morning, we'd get up and see what Santa got us, and then out to the barn and do the chores and get everything done, and come back in and have breakfast and open up some more presents, get in the car, drive to Winnipeg, another big meal, more gifts, and then get back in the car and drive all the way. And it didn't matter about the weather. You had to get back because there was cattle that needed to be tended to. And if there was an absolute emergency, maybe we would have been able to get a hold of Buff or somebody to come over and give a hand. But for the most part, it was a twice daily thing at the very least, especially in the winter, to take care of them. And so for me, it developed a sense of work ethic and a work ethic in adverse conditions, because it wasn't always, there's nothing glamorous. There's nothing glamorous about it. It's not
you couldn't open the door and say, it's snowing, I'm not going to go out today.
Yeah, well, really.
Oh, that brings me to asking about the elements. You guys must have just froze your asses off out there.
Oh, there were times when it was really bitter. Yeah.
Oh,
The worst was when the water would freeze up, and then you would have this huge, because the water kept coming, and it just kept building up and building up. So you had this huge mountain of water, and you had to get through it so that you could fix the water leak. And there was no easy way to do that when it's that cold. I mean, you're literally in there with a pickaxe, working through that stuff and trying to get in it, and it's coming out almost as fast as you can chip it away. So that's just an example of the kind of challenges that we're up against.
well, and hot summers.
Yeah.
You're either freezing or you're sweating.
Yep, for sure.
And I remember the fence. There was that all was, remember? Because I would say for X amount of my life, there was a fence. And then when the fence came down, that's how I last remember it.
You mean around the outside edge of the farm?
Yeah, over by Grandma and Grandpa's clothesline, there would have been like a fence with a little gate.
right? Mhm.
Well, and then there was electricity, which you definitely learned a respect for electricity, as did every other living creature on the farm, because it would definitely bite you. And
So it was an electric fence.
Well,
for the cattle, it was.
some of the fences were electric, some weren't.
Oh,
Like if you don't have an electric fence, you have to have multiple wires, 3 or 4 wires, in order to contain cattle. You have to have the posts quite close together and the wire real tight. If you have an electric fence that's working well, one wire will do the job, and the posts don't have to be very close together.
And it will make a believer out of
What you would notice is if you wanted to move cattle from one place to the other, and you opened a gate to let them through, a lot of times they wouldn't go through the gate because they thought there was an electric wire there.
mm.
It had been there so long that they just respected that exact area.
Yep.
And they weren't going to go anywhere.
Yeah. Well, if you wanted to test it, all you had to do was take a steel bar and slam it in the ground, and then just run that up close to the fence, and it would jump. And I don't think it wouldn't jump an inch, but it'd jump half an inch.
About half an inch, yeah.
Yeah.
And it just sizzle, just
yeah.
zzz.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was alternating. So once you got good at it, and this was, I'm not going to say the names of the cousins that we used to pick on, but every once in a while, you'd learn how to grab the wire and let it go. And you could do that without getting, if you could hear it, and eventually you did learn where you could hear it, whether it was a little spark down the line, rub it on a weed or whatever, but you could hear it. Is the wire electric? You grab it, like, no, it's not. And they go ahead to go over it, and pow. And that was
That's mean. I have been on this trickery side of that though. I wonder where I learned that from.
But I'll tell you, that was a powerful fence. There were times when, you need to get from one side to the other, and you didn't want to go a long distance to go to the gate or whatever. And there was times when you'd get down and just shinny through on your belly. But there's the odd time you didn't stay quite low enough.
Yep.
And when that thing touched your back, you just flattened you to the ground.
Yep.
Just where you hit with a hammer.
and I'll tell you one thing you didn't do is you didn't go over it. You might go over it, but you sure weren't going over it, because there was
no, it's one thing to have it hit you from the back, but from the bottom, that's not good.
It light you up, you bet. So,
what was your temperament with cattle? I've heard it said about someone I know that maybe shouldn't have been dealing with cattle. They said they absolutely brought out the worst in him.
It did that.
So how much patience does this take?
Well, it takes a lot of patience, but everybody has a limit.
Yeah.
And there's a time or two when I've lost my patience and did things I shouldn't have done.
Yeah.
And I've more times than did things, but said things that I shouldn't have said.
Well, saying is probably not as bad as doing, because you maybe only have an audience of whoever's in the barn.
I'll tell you what.
You're hoping nobody else is around.
Anytime I was in there and I heard it, I'll tell you what, I was down low and real quiet.
Well, for you to get mad, Dad, that takes, in my view, quite a bit.
Yeah, that's probably the one thing that will do it sooner than anything is livestock.
But I will say this about the growing up on the farm in total, but because we spend so much time in the feedlot, I have to say that for me, a lot of the technical skills that I need for what I do today, I learned in the feedlot and in the barn. Whether it's, you talk about running equipment, you talk about the use of hand tools, understanding of animals and electricity and everything else. And probably the biggest thing for me, and a lot of people don't think too much about this, but gravity and drainage. The feedlot is, or in our case anyway, was down low. And so you had to keep that drained, or it just turned into a big lake of nothing that you wanted to be anywhere near. And it wasn't healthy for the cattle, and it wasn't a good environment for anything else. So we were constantly out there with shovels working water and trying to make water go where it didn't want to go. And I learned an awful lot about drainage. working those feedlot areas and trying to keep water moving. And so, and I refer back to that. I think about that often. The amount of time that we spent fighting with that stuff out there in rubber boots out in the muck and the mire.
Yeah, and we, there was different times when I would have somebody with a backhoe come and dig a trench through the trees where we couldn't do anything ourselves because we had to have a way for that muck to get out of there.
Yeah.
And that was, where we lived was not absolutely flat prairie, but it was flat enough. If you were down in the Red River Valley, of course, it'd be even worse because there's hardly any drainage there.
Is some of this drainage problem just from the spring?
Like the drainage depends on what you call the topography of the land, the up and down, how much rolling it is, how flat it is.
Yeah.
And water always has a path that it flows. Like, for instance, the river, that went through Larvier and so on. All the water from our area went into that in various ways through creeks and streams and so on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And on the way there was all kinds of obstacles like sloughs and so on. And the trick was to methodically get that water to move from one spot to the next without causing your neighbor too much trouble.
Right.
There was people that went at it too aggressively, and there was lawsuits over that because people spilled too much water onto somebody else's land. Typically, you're not supposed to do anything to change the flow of water through the waterways. Like, again, it's kind of a law of the land that you're not supposed to do that unless you have permission from the people that are going to be affected.
Well, it's a tough one to uphold, that's for sure. But water definitely takes the path of least resistance. So it's just a real simple rule. But
yeah, and that's a problem that's as old as water. Always been a problem.
So I'm trying to put some anatomy type of things together. I've heard artificial insemination. I've heard rumblings of castration, although for a long time I thought it was called decastration, which it is not. That's like a double whammy.
Trying to put something back.
A double negative. I'm sure they wanted you to put it back. And then also I was wondering, we've talked about Charlie. So what did you do? Did you try to have a bull or two around? How often did artificial insemination have to happen? And so on.
I'll take you back a little bit there. A lot of people that have cattle have a bull to impregnate the female so that they'll have calves. And if they have more than a certain number of cows, then they have to have more than one bull. But what used to happen in the earlier years was when people had small herds of cattle, if you had, 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 cows, you really couldn't afford to have a bull because they're expensive to feed and so on. And so neighbors would work together. And sometimes they would, bull would be in one pasture for a while and then he'd be in the other one. But for the most part, whoever owned the bull wanted that in his own pasture so that all the cows that needed to be impregnated would get so at the right time. So I'll go back to the early years when my dad was farming and I was a kid. And you learn over time to notice when a cow is in heat, which means that she's receptive to being bred and it'll happen. But if you don't have a bull, then you have to get the cow to a place where the bull is. So what your grandpa used to do is he would use a team of horses and the old wagon that didn't have any paint on it. And he'd tie the cow with a rope. There was a ring on the side of the wagon used for that purpose. And we'd go and open the gate and go through into our neighbor's pasture. And at that time it was Side-Dew. You would have known the place as Elmer-Dew. But we would go over there and you'd have to then drive around a little bit and hopefully get the bull interested in the cow and that sort of thing. And if everything went according to plan, maybe within half an hour or so, the right things would happen and the cow would be bred and you'd go home and that would look after it for that situation.
And that's what I was talking about. The sex education took place on the
Yeah.
farm.
Right.
Never had a class on it.
So was this an arrangement that Grandpa had with Elmer Dew?
Yeah, it was,
Oh.
and with his dad, Saidu, yeah.
Huh.
And I guess
It's not very romantic. It sounds a little more arranged, but
it's like an arranged marriage, yeah, if you want to think of it that way, yeah. Anyway, so when I started farming, I decided that I really didn't want to own a bull, or either that, or I bought a bull for a year and decided I didn't like to have them around. So anyway, I knew about artificial insemination. Is they do that by harvesting the semen from bulls and freeze it into little glass
Which is a process everyone should see done.
I'm good.
Yeah, you don't need that. Okay. Anyway, but when you do that, you have access to the best bulls in the world for a very reasonable cost. And these bulls are tested. They know how many pounds a day their offspring gain. They know all kinds of things about them. And if you have a good bull, you're going to improve the chance of having productive calves. So anyway, so then when you're using artificial insemination, you have to know what to look for to know when your cows are coming in heat. And then you have to get on the phone and call the AI service. And the guy comes out, drives down the lane and parks near the barn where you have the cow waiting. And he goes in and he takes a little vial out of the liquid nitrogen where it's frozen. And he puts it in a little container of water to thaw it out. And he puts a pipette, which is like a long plastic or glass tube with a little squeeze thing on the
Like
end.
a turkey baster.
Like a baster, yeah. And so then
Don't let it get in the kitchen.
okay. And so then he breaks the end off this little glass vial and sucks the semen up into this straw. And then he has a long glove on his hand and puts it into the rectal area of the cow so that he can tell where things are going. And then he inserts this pipette in the vagina of the cow, and he's able to guide that to the right place and go through the cervix into the uterus and inject the semen in there. And if all goes well, the cow gets pregnant, and that's all that happens. Now, if it doesn't happen, if she comes in heat again, then you might have to have them come again a second time. And that would be, a month later, because the gestation cycle for a cow is very similar to a human being, around 28 days or thereabouts. So anyway, that's what AI is about.
They call it artificial intelligence now.
I
You're
know,
calling
that's
it artificial insemination.
That's a bit confusing, yeah.
Sorry.
But anyway, there's things you do right and things you do wrong there too. In order to get to aim for bigger calves, better production, I was using Charolais bulls. And Charolais bulls tend to have larger calves. And so I had some real trouble with cows having difficulty calving because the calf was too big.
And the cows weren't Charolais. So
right.
The cows weren't built for the Charolais
right.
Yeah.
And it depends, like some breeds, for instance, Angus are noted for being easier calving. So if you had Angus cows, you might have less trouble that way. But one of the reasons that they have less trouble is that they tend to have smaller calves. So anyway, it's just the problems of the game.
And there were plenty.
When did Charlie come along? Because we had him for a while.
Charlie, well, he was a red, let's see,
It wasn't that brown Swiss, was he?
He was a red, no, he was either red Angus or a polled Hereford. I forget which one he was. But anyway, he was quite a friendly, quiet animal, as long as you didn't turn your back on him.
Except for the way his rear end has been described.
Any bull.
So okay,
Form.
so what was
Bulls
the-
have a tendency to, well, they'll just spray it all over the place. It's just a little bit of a different anatomy. If you look at the rear end of a bull, you can tell right away because they're just plastered with it. And so there's just nothing nice about, there's nothing easy and nothing nice about cleaning up after bulls. Cows aren't so bad. It's all pretty much in one place and it's not, there it is. So, yeah, you talk to kids whose toughest job in the world was delivering pizza at Domino's, and they're going to have a tough time identifying with the science of cow flop. But when anybody,
so what was the decision? You said you had a bull, you didn't like it, you did all this other stuff. So how did you come back around to having a bull again?
Well, I was getting to have, I think, a few more cows, and it's a lot of trouble to try to detect when the cows are in heat, and you got to catch them and have them in the barn so that they have to be restrained while you might call for the fellow to come, and you would hope he'd come in the morning, but he might not come till late afternoon. And maybe he's missed that narrow window when the cow is most likely to get pregnant. So,
which the bull doesn't miss.
No, the bull is pretty attentive. Yeah,
he's there.
So you would just leave them alone, mingling around together in the feedlot and hoping nature would take its course instead of having to go through AI
right.
or attaching the cow for a midnight stroll down to the neighbor.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and of course, if you got your own bull, you don't you just put the bull out of the pasture with all the cows.
Yeah, and just let them gibber.
They know what's going on, and they look after whatever needs to be done. So I did that for a number of years, and then I guess right up to the point that I didn't have cattle, I had a bull for the last number of years.
So what was the decision to get out?
To get out of cattle?
Yep.
Okay. Well, it was like I had suffered enough. My back gave me trouble all through the years I was farming, and working with livestock is a real aggravation. You never know when you're going to strain yourself more than you should, having to either protect yourself or to manhandle an animal or something, and of course handling bales and all that sort of stuff is heavy work. And so I guess part of it was that. Part of it was that we got to the point where we could sell more grain directly. And also I was growing sunflowers, selling them, and they didn't require any quota. So that was like a cash crop. Same canola was considered a cash crop too.
The oil seeds.
But anyway, that was part of it. And I was decided that I wanted to get clear of livestock and have a little more freedom. Like it ties you up so badly, you can't go anywhere, do anything.
How did that feel when you were finally out?
Well, it was a relief, really. Like, sure, there's some things about it that you don't, you maybe some ways wish they were still around. But I found it was very relaxing to get on the tractor with the mower and mow the yard, as compared to having to fix fence to keep the cattle in so they could mow it for me. So anyway, just a trade-off.
For people, you hear people complain, oh, we got a dog or we got two dogs or a cat or whatever, and we just can't be gone for extended periods of time, or we have to take the dog and put it in a kennel while we're away and all that sort of thing. And I always think back to having, however many cattle, and it was a 2-time a day deal minimum.
Yeah. And there's another factor that comes into it there is the fact that, all those years we had Grandpa living on the farm, and for quite a few years, he was able to step in and cover for me to do minimal stuff when I couldn't be there. So if I needed him to feed the cattle, I could leave things handy for him and he could do it for me. But it got to the point where he really wasn't able to do that anymore. And so it was time to change things.
Well, and there's the point of view too, right? That you had some mouths to feed. So you had cows to milk and you had lots of beef. And this was probably keeping you from having to buy those things yourself.
Yeah, that was kind of a side benefit. Yeah. And not that it wasn't like the milking part of it. I really hadn't figured on ever having a dairy cow, but it got to the point where I wasn't having any luck with any of the beef cattle that I had. You couldn't hand milk them. Like some of the beef cattle that we had when I was growing up, they had attachments that were big enough to get a hold of, and you could actually squeeze the milk out into a pail. But when they got so that you could only use 2 fingers, that wasn't very workable. So, and when I bought that dairy cow, you remember the dairy cow?
That's Daisy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought I was going to be able to hand milk her, but she was not a Dolly Parton, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's so weird. You'd expect a dairy cow to be well endowed, right?
But anyway, so then I bought the milking machine from Jack Taylor and the separator, and I used that for a number of years and kept the house in milk. And when I had the one cow milking, then I usually milked a couple of other ones too. So.
She wasn't the brightest cow, that one. There was some smart cows, but she wasn't one of them.
Are we talking about Daisy?
Yes.
Ah.
Not necessarily that smart, but boy, she produced.
Oh no, she put it out.
Right. Yeah, she was quite a good producer, that one. Yeah.
Except when she tried to jump over fences and cut herself all cut up. And then
well, that wasn't good. No.
Salve, put all the salve. That's when I learned what bag balm is.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, nipple cream or whatever.
Yeah.
no, every once in a while you'd run into cows. You learn each one of them. Every one of them has their own markings and everything. You learn each one. We weren't allowed to name them because we never knew which one we were going to be eating. But you kind of got to know which ones were which. And there was some that were, they had their own personalities. And there was some that were downright, well, there was some that were mean, and there was some that were mischievous, and some that were always looking. They were always the ones who could find the hole in the fence if there was one.
Yeah.
And you got to know them, and you're working with. You're out there, 2 times a day. So
Oh yeah.
I saw those cows more than I saw the kids at school. So you get to know them, and for better or for worse.
They do have personalities, all right.
Mm-hmm.
So I have my memories of the feedlot from childhood, which aren't a lot. But Dad, do you have memories of the feedlot as a child, or did you not have a feedlot until you were an adult?
No, we didn't have a feedlot. Your grandpa only kept as many cows as he could put in the barn for the winter. And so I don't think he ever had more than maybe 11 cows or something like that. And then there was always, the calves, he had them too. So there'd be calves tied up, and there'd be calves in a box stall at the corner. But
do you have pigs? Did Grandpa ever have any pigs?
He apparently years ago he did, but before I would remember. And so then there was a couple of years where I raised pigs, and I don't know whether you remember that or not.
I do.
I barely remember the chickens, barely.
Yeah. No, well, the pigs were for the table. The chickens, obviously, for the eggs.
Yeah, chickens were continuous for a lot of years.
Sure. I remember taking the eggs. Well, that was the joke about that accident in Larvier. We're getting hit by the motor grader, and not an egg. I don't think there was an egg that got cracked, was there?
I don't think there was.
The rest of us got our eggs cracked, but there wasn't one in the back that got cracked.
Yeah,
we're all good. But that was quite a few eggs. I don't know how many we had, but there was quite a few eggs in there.
At that point, I guess we were hauling them in what they called 15 dozen crates. And so there probably would have been, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 or 6 crates of eggs, something like that.
Going to
We had to
Madison.
make a trip to Manitou once a week with eggs.
And you had to wash them. You know, they had to be clean.
You
Yeah.
didn't wash them if you could avoid it,
No, well,
because it would affect the hatching part of it. So if you damage, like there's an egg has a sort of an invisible coating on it
mhm.
that you don't normally see, and if you wash the eggs, it does reduce the chance of them hatching. So
Hmm.
we cleaned them dry if we had to. And there was times you had to wipe them because they were too messy. But and of course, for years, of course, we had all the eggs we wanted to use,
Mhm.
and so that helped also with the cost of raising a family and so on.
I remember maybe only one thing about chickens, a couple things. So all these entries in Grandma's diary, they just kill me when she says, I picture her with her church face on as she's saying this. I'm thinking about the church, the prim and proper church face when she writes, we dressed 10 chickens. Dressed? I know that means murdered, ran around the yard, blood everywhere, and feathers pulled out by the root. So I wouldn't have picked dressed, but that was the classy word that she was using.
You're missing a few levels of the process.
Oh, I'm trying to get through it real quick.
There was a
Well, they
boiling
look-
process and there was a gutting process and everything else.
They did it in the garage, didn't they?
Quite often, yes.
Yes.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah, we'd have the old the gas stove out there and the old boiler on there with the water boiling, and
Oh,
you
I don't even
dip
want to
them-
know what that's for.
dip them in boiling water to loosen the feathers so that they
Oh.
pulled off easier.
They could pluck them out a little bit easier.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Grandpa had his tie. He had a 2-nail tie, a piece of
Oh, yeah.
tie, and that was and his axe, his hatchet. And he'd catch them by the back legs and just swing them over, and their head would catch between those nails and lop it off and let the
And then-
bird go flopping around, and the head to go the other way. And usually there was a cat not too far away, and
Oh,
Yeah,
and,
cats got the heads. And
it was
oh,
never a mess.
I probably
Cat-
let that cat lick my face. Gross. See what I don't know. There's all the things I don't know.
Yeah. And yeah, we would, I don't know how many we would do it. The most we would do at one time would likely be 10 or 12, but often it was only 3 or 4, depending on what whether we just wanted one for Sunday dinner or whether we were trying to clean up on a bunch of them. And
I
then
don't remember
end,
complaining when I was eating it, but that's probably because I didn't know the process.
that's true, yeah.
And then if I was reading in the diary and I would go, oh, and Mike would say, what are you reading? I'm like, dressed 10 chickens. That's what we're calling it. I said,
Well,
dressed.
they looked prettier after they were dressed than if you put them on the table the other way.
Oh, Grandma, listen, Grandma's 5-year diary only had 4 lines, so dressed was probably a nice quick word to summarize.
It was commonly used, yeah. Mhm.
Okay, so how many years do you think you had cattle? Didn't you say when you thought it started, and then when did it end? What's the span of years?
Oh, well, like I started farming in 1962 or 63, I guess you'd say officially. And so 84 or 83, so
20 years.
20 some years, yeah.
Mhm. And that was enough.
It was enough, yeah. Yeah, I got myself into enough trouble in those years.
And then the fence came down.
Oh, well, some fences came down, yeah. Mhm.
Like I'm thinking of the main one that I would see between the houses and the barn.
I guess I don't specifically remember that coming down, but I guess it must have at some point.
Well, I don't remember it coming down, but it did come down.
Okay. Mhm.
Yeah. What I remember about the feedlot is just tiny things. So one would be if I was, helping and I would want to be part of something, I would be little and I would get to be on the back of the 44. But what I thought was very trusting was I was told to hang on. But man, did you ever want to hang on? Because all that was forward and back, forward and back, forward and back, forward and back. That was not a That was not a smooth nor you would hang on tight. And I'd smell the silage. That's how I think I like the smell of silage, because it's
Yeah.
just that. I wish I could smell it now. I haven't smelled it in a really long time. And I
Yeah,
remember the only other thing I really remember, sorry, let me get it out, is if you see like a little calf running around playfully in I thought that was so cute. I thought little calves were just darling.
yeah, well, they are too.
Because
We
cows
see
don't do that. They're pretty docile, but little calves, man, they can be really cute, I think.
just today we were out in the country. Um, our church had their annual picnic today, and instead of having it the usual place, they had it at a small country hall, which is just 10 miles out or something like that.
Mhm.
And on the way, we drove past pastures with cows and calves in them, and so it is interesting to see the little calves running around, all being thankful they're somebody else's.
Yeah.
And looking forward to the barbecue at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, it's all part of the process. We saw our first, they're running a little late this year. We saw our first fawn born out front today. So I've noticed that there's been a couple of baby elk, and we're getting more moose all the time down here. But the deer were running a little late this year, and so we just noticed this morning the first one. But yeah, it's always fun to watch the young ones, whether they're cattle or elk or deer or whatever, bouncing around, having fun, practicing their maneuvers.
That's why I'm anti-veal, because I picture that little prancing calf being so sweet. Just eat the grown ones. That's all. Do you remember anything specifically in your childhood, Rob, about the feedlot, or?
Well, I've kind of touched on it. Like I said, for me, it was a real learning experience, and I benefited from all of that, getting an understanding of animal husbandry and medicine with all the shots and the bloating and all the different aspects of it that you had to know. Probably one of the residual benefits of this process for me, having grown up the way I did with grandpa and dad on the farm, was that in retrospect, I learned a lot about the difference between the generations, having the opportunity to work with both grandpa and dad. And I don't believe that I saw it that much at the time, but now looking back on it, I do identify with a lot of that, and appreciate the fact that I did get the opportunity to grow up in that environment and learn some of the skills that I was able to retain through adulthood.
Yeah, and I can add a little bit to that in that, okay, you and I are, you might say, a small generation apart, roughly 21 years or whatever. Your grandpa was 2 generations older than I was.
Yeah.
And so when I was growing up and getting to know him, he was already moving on into his middle years and past the more aggressive part of his life. And he was pulling back a bit. And you saw him another generation later than that.
Yep.
But he was, again, from what I hear from my sisters and so on, he was a pretty, what would you say, a very commanding sort of person. He took charge of things, and he didn't put up with much guff. I was probably a lot easier to get along with when I was an adult than he was when he was younger, But
that's kind of what I gathered from stories from Aunt Myrna too. Is that a little bit of a different guy.
Yeah.
But
yeah, years do something to us. That's for sure.
So I must have got the sweetest grandpa of all, because I was the youngest. I had the most time for him to mellow.
Oh, I'm sure you did.
So the opposite of you, Rob, I didn't get the education you got. I didn't get the birds and bees. And I remember a time in school, I used to be so mad because I always felt like I was always the last to know, because I think I mostly was the last to know. Nobody wanted to tell me. So I think I was in grade 4 or 5 or something. And I made a comment in school, in class, about how, oh yeah, when the cows are jumping on each other's backs and they're playing a game. And my classmates all knew what that was, and I didn't, and I got thoroughly embarrassed. I was the only one that didn't know. So there was
I
Sharon
see.
and Danny Gertz and Heather Lyon. Who else was in my grade? I was the only one that didn't know, and I thought somebody could have told me and saved me the embarrassment. So
Well,
think
you
of
could-
all the stuff you knew. My big education was Tippy was my big birth control education. That's what I got.
Mhm.
Yeah. Prevent puppies, whatever you do. That's the message I got in life.
Well, today
You
you
and-
can,
when you
today
were
you can
dealing-
Google it. You know.
Yeah, didn't have Google back then.
No,
I don't even
No,
know
it's
if we
hard.
had that volume of encyclopedia.
no, it's hard to believe how, how relatively few years we've had the things we have today, like Google and internet and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
It's not that many years in total, and yet we're
No.
so deeply ingrained in it.
Mm-hmm.
And for the younger generations, absolutely completely dependent upon it.
Yeah.
They have no working knowledge of anything that they can't look up on their phone.
Right.
And
Yeah. And you guys were working so hard to get the egg and the sperm together, and I was working so hard to keep them apart.
I remember that one vet. He used to come out. He was, I don't know how tall he was. He was a monster.
Who
He
was
must
that?
have been, I don't know who he was, but he was one of the vets that came out for that AI process. And
Oh,
he must have been close to 7 feet tall. He showed up in a diesel Mercedes. And I mean, he must have put, like Schwarzenegger, he must have had the seat in the back. He must have just ripped the back seat out altogether, just
yeah.
thrown the front seat in the back. 'Cause
He literally had to unfold himself to get up out
he
of
did.
it.
He did.
Yeah.
You'd see this
Yeah.
guy struggling to get out of this car, and then all of a
Mm.
sudden he just stood up, and you're going, "Holy smokes!" What?
Yeah, he was tall, that's for sure.
I mean, he
there's
was
not
stupid.
that many tall people from our part of the world.
He wasn't from our part of the world.
Oh.
No way. If you're doing AI breeding, you're not from any part of the world. You're kind of in your own little world there. But I mean, he had to stoop over in the barn. But that's how.
Yeah.
I mean, he was that tall. But anyway, that was just one of the few things that I remember that I thought was funny about that process. I got a couple of other stories about that, but I'm not going to share them with you today on this particular.
We should have opened the whiskey up at the beginning of the talk.
Yeah. Well, we might be talking about that in mid-July.
We could have done a shot every 10 or 12 minutes.
Mhm.
Every time we said AI, take a shot.
That's one kind of game. Yeah.
Well,
Like the idea of having cattle around, in so many ways it controls your life. You just got things going right, and there's a cow outside the fence. You got to stop what you're doing and go and correct that. And hopefully it's just a simple job. Sometimes it took maybe an hour or more to get things rectified and back to place. And then you've lost a bunch of valuable time from your cropping side of things, cultivating corn or sunflowers or whatever you were doing.
I'm starting to have a better understanding of Buff now. You know why he was such a talkative bus driver and enjoyed teasing everyone so much is because it's the only friggin' time he got away from that barn.
Yeah, he was tied in pretty tight with that dairy
Yeah.
operation.
This was an outing for him to drive the kids to school, I'll bet.
Well, and imagine the idea that we have one cow, one Daisy, who was about the dumbest cow I ever saw, and he had a whole barn full.
Yeah.
So I mean, it'd be like herding cats all day long.
Maybe all his dairy cows weren't dumb, or a dairy cow's dumb.
Maybe he had a different breed apart. I don't know, but I never envied Buff for the life that he had chosen for himself.
Yeah.
Milking cows all day long. And he didn't do it the easy way, at least not till later. Anyway, he did it the hard way.
Yeah, to begin with, it was a hard way, that's for sure. Mhm.
Yep. Anytime you see a guy headed out to the field with a horse and a manure boat, you know that there's nothing easy about that process. That's doing it the hard way. So, but you didn't want to mess with Buff either because his forearms were about as big as his legs. So he was a serious customer.
Well, I never pissed him off, so I'm glad about that.
Kind of sum it up by saying that after I got rid of the cows, then I spent more time in the shop in the winter with the fire going.
Hmm.
And so I gradually started tearing all those slabs off the fence and cutting them up and burning them. So eventually, gradually, the feedlot disappeared.
Right. So you were burning wood in there.
Yes, we heated that with wood quite a lot.
Yeah. Do you know, I wondered about that because I don't remember seeing any big piles of wood around.
Well, we just kind of kept tearing things down. Like once I stopped having cattle, then I gradually tore down all the feedlots and cut the wood up and burnt them. And we had some, some trees as well that we used. But there was never any huge pile all at one time.
Well, it must have been nice to be able to wake up and look outside and see the snow coming down and just roll over and go back to bed. Say, heck with it. I don't have to get up this morning, and I'm not going to.
Well, it wasn't always that simple. I would sometimes have a truck was due at the elevator any minute to pick up a load of grain, so I'd have to quickly get take the tractor and drive in there, blow the snow to the driveway or off the side.
Right.
Or a lot of times I would take my snow blower in and clear out the pathway to the rink or to the church or whatever.
I don't envision you rolling over and going back to sleep. I envision you getting up and making oatmeal and then maybe thinking, this is great, I'm going to snow blow and then I don't have to do chores.
I don't know whether I ever got to that point. I still don't roll over and go back to sleep. But I don't make oatmeal very often anymore.
Wow. That should have been reversed.
Well, I don't know. Anyway.
When I come up there, I'm expecting some Red River.
Oh,
well, we'll have to see if I can find some again.
Oh, I never want to have that again. I suspect I won't.
What we get if we have anything like that now is Sunny Boy, which is
I've heard
similar, but not exactly the same.
Not quite as much flaxseed in it.
Yeah. Well, maybe less wheat. I don't know.
Yeah.
I probably had the best porridge makers of all time. You and Grandpa, and I'll bet, Rob, you make a mean bowl of porridge and you make it creamy. We probably even had cream to put on it, but I was either ahead or behind my time.
Yeah, you hadn't learned to appreciate things, I guess.
Yeah, I'll bet you guys were just excellent at it, and I wasn't appreciative of the whoosh in my bowl. I don't think it's a whoosh sound. I think it's
more of a splat, something like the barn. It's a barn sound.
The first one's a splat. The second one makes that little weird ridge on the top. Thank God for brown sugar.
Yep.
Well, guys, thanks for all your input.
Well, it's one more topic down the drain.
That's right.
Yeah.
The next one I'd like to be the dune buggy.
Oh, I see. We haven't done that yet. Eh?
It's actually going to be one of my favorites because we all learned to drive on that thing, and it was a very big source of fun.
Yep. And there are a few good stories along there too.
One thing I could add about the feedlot is that when I built that to begin with, of course, my financial situation was very constrained. Starting farming, having very little funding to work with. So your grandpa and I went out to the little bluffs around the edges of the farm and we cut poplar trees. And we hauled them in, took the branches off them, and we used them to build the, we used the poles to make the chute that contained the cattle when we were trying to work with them, used them to make gates, all kinds of different things like that to save a buck here and there. And it worked. We also, we started out with just slabs for wind protection, and we found that was barely enough. So then we used poles to hold up a roof, and we built a roof out of slabs. And they were sitting on poles that were cut from the poplar bluffs. And so that's just something else, a do-it-yourself sort of thing we did to save some money.
You might not be able to envision what I'm about to say, but one of the shots that Greg got of the feedlot with the trees behind it looked like there was two parallel things that kind of looked like a fence.
What is
that? What is
that
that?
was the silo. That was the silo.
Oh, what's
So
that?
That was towards the west end of the yard.
Yeah.
There was actually 3 fences which made like two areas to pack the silage into, side by side.
Hmm.
And yeah, I noticed that in the video. You could still
Yeah.
see those fences there.
Yep.
Yes.
And they were built out of railway fencing posts, which were cedar. And then I did buy shiplap lumber to nail on to make the sides. And I think the middle between the 2 sides, I think that was ties standing on end. But the sides were, because I had room to put soil against them to support the sides, I was able to use lighter posts there. But that silo actually worked well for a long number of years.
And it's still there.
Still there. Yep.
One thing I was gonna ask, will I remember before it times out? Oh yeah, I was gonna tell you. I was looking up a few things that we've discussed in Grandma's diary to get some dates. And you guys were always wondering back and forth if the year you built the machine shed was 1980 or what it was. It was 78. And it's all in Grandma's diary. I'm going to have to figure out a way to share it. It's really interesting. And anyway, I thought you guys might be interested to know the year.
Okay, so then it must have been the spring of 77 then, must have been the year that the shop burned down.
It was
Because we didn't-
77.
Because we didn't build the.
Did
a
you
year
think it
went
was
by.
that soon, though, that you built the machine shed? Because I thought you guys even called it Rob's last summer there, but I don't know if it was the last summer in 78. You didn't waste any time making that, did you?
Well,
that
no,
machine shed.
like I said, we had made quite a few plans ahead of time that was going to happen somewhere. We didn't know it was going to happen where the old shop was.
Right.
But I already had the telephone poles and I had a plan in my head as to how that would happen. And so anyway, yeah, so.
It starts on a certain date, I think in July, where you start measuring for the machine shed.
Probably.
Grandma calls it the new building quite a bit, sometimes the machine shed.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I'll just talk quick because it's about to run out. You guys were saying it's not like we just shut down and built the machine shed for 2 months. It was on top of everything else that was going on at the time. And what's interesting is Grandma's entries during that time tells the story of exactly what else was going on in the yard. And I thought fascinating because it completely ties in with what you said. And Grandma would never know the importance of all of her documenting and what we're doing with that now.
Oh, that's interesting.
And Grandpa would also not know how much we're admiring his trees.
True.
I kind of like both of those things. I really do.
We don't know what he knows. We hope he knows something about it.
Well, I just don't think that either one of them would expect that, but might be a pleasant surprise. So,
right.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, well,
great to see you both.
Must be down to second.
Here they are. Please welcome the Sleepy Man Banjo Boys. Nice to see you. Thank you, sir. Great job. Good to see you as well. Turn around and let the folks get a good look at everybody. Now, Sleepy Man. Where'd you get the name Sleepy Man, Banjo Boys? Where'd that come from?
The banjo is so heavy for him that he used to just lie back with his eyes closed and just play it like that.
Oh, that's Sleepy Man Banjo Boys. That's great. And I'll tell you something you probably know by now. Chicks dig the banjo. You are printing your own money, my friend. How old are you?
9.
9? And you? How old are you? 12. What are you doing? And you're all brothers? This is not like the Jonas brothers, is it?
Well, no, it's not.
Listen, great pleasure to have you guys with us. Good luck. Have a wonderful summer. There it is right there. The Sleepy Man Banjo Boys, America's music.